This is something that's been in the news lately. A lack of understanding of policy leads to bad policy, and particularly unintended consequences. Today, the 18th of February, Facebook has stopped providing free advertising to essentially everybody in Australia. Let's think through about what led us here, and you guys think about what the consequences are politically. So we all probably agree that the tech giants, and I'm going to refer primarily to Google and Facebook here, need to be taxed. And we probably agree why. Now, I don't want to just jump in and say, when you set taxes, you've got to think about incentives, and you don't want to lead to the unintended consequences we've got at the moment. So think about how Google, for example, advertises in Australia. When I was invited to advertise with Google, I was told that I would be contracting with Google Ireland. So all Australian advertising revenue for advertising that's done through Google goes through Ireland. And that makes sense for Google, right? The overall tax rate is lower in Ireland, so Google faces a lower tax. And they avoid the higher tax, which is Australian tax, on Australian economic activity. So for Google, this makes sense. The problem in addressing this, presumably we want to address the fact that economic activity is taking place in Australia, but it's being taxed in Ireland. In other words, Australian tax is being avoided on that economic activity. But doing it consistently, fairly, and unavoidably is hard. So an example of a strategy, let me talk through the example and I'll tell you why it probably won't work. An example of a strategy might be to say to the tech giants, Facebook and Google, give us your consolidated financial statements worldwide. We'll calculate the ratio of worldwide profit to worldwide revenue. So how much of your revenue turns into profit, how much is covering expenses. Work out what your Australian revenue is, work out what your worldwide revenue is, so that we can tax Google or Facebook on the proportion of their revenue that they've earned in Australia. Of course, we don't want to be taxing revenue because that leads to other weird consequences. So we want to be taxing profit for fairness purposes. But on the other hand, it's easy to shift expenses around. You can, for example, say, we're paying an expense to our Swiss subsidiary because they're doing a whole bunch of really expensive research and development for us. So we can effectively shift profit out. So that's why I'm saying that what we need to do is we need to avoid that issue of profit shifting. So what this formula at the bottom would do would be takes the Australian proportion of their worldwide revenue and works out what the profit on that would be using their worldwide profit rate, right? Because they shift profit from country to country, so their profit in Australia might be zero, their profit in Ireland might be high. We're not letting you get away with that. We're going to assume that whatever percentage you earn worldwide on your revenue, you earn in Australia, and then apply an Australian tax rate to that. Now that seems simple and straightforward, and I'm sure there are some complications surrounding that, but I don't want to get into those. I'm just trying to say that is not a simple thing to do, but it will be fair, it'll be consistent, and it won't screw around with incentives. So, the advantage of doing that would be we'd be taxing the tech giants the same way that we're taxing everybody else. And we don't want to be doing special deals for anybody. A level playing field matters. It matters so that competition in the market is not disadvantaged by random government policy. And by competition, I don't just mean the existing participants in the market. I mean also people who are thinking of entering into advertising, right? Imagine that this thing that was applied to Google and Facebook was applied to all social media immediately. You would not be wanting to start a social media company in Australia. So clearly the incentives have to not get in the way of people doing business, but they have to yield some fairness. Okay, so what is happening? What's the Australian government doing at the moment? It's passed through the lower house, it's going to the Senate. The two tech giants and other tech companies as well do two types of advertising. They do paid advertising, and that's pretty straightforward, right? A non-profit that I'm involved with regularly purchases advertising on Facebook, and it's quite effective. So some of that revenue is likely to be avoided. So tax on that revenue is likely to be avoided. For example, Google moves some of its or shows some of its profit in Ireland. So we can address that. The second part of advertising that Google and Facebook do is unpaid. Now, why do they do this? Well, it benefits the person being advertised, the Australian press, for example, But it also benefits Google and Facebook because it keeps people on their platform. And the longer people spend time on their platform, the more time they spend on their platform, the more likely they are to see paid ads. So the Australian government is looking, sorry, spelling error here. So the Australian government is looking to penalise the giants for doing free advertising. So they're providing advertising for Nine, News Corp, 7. They're providing headlines. They provide links. And you can then click through and go to these guys' websites. Right? And in fact, if you look at News Corp, whenever you click on a news link in Google, you probably get the heading in half the first paragraph, and then you've got to be a subscriber to see the rest. So it's not as if Google is stealing any information from news that's providing in public. You want to read the story, you've got to subscribe. And for those of you that, an argument that has been put is that the media companies are having their information used without permission. That's not true. If you remember coding, as I do, back in HTML, actually coding up web pages by hand, you'll remember the no index meta tag. If you put a no index tag in the top of your HTML file, that file is not indexed by Google or Yahoo or whoever. If you want an entire folder, an entire group of files not to be indexed, you put a robots.txt file in there that specifies which pages should not be indexed. So Google is not, and Facebook are not using information that they don't have permission to. We know that News Corp controls how much is available publicly. We know that News Corp could ban pages being indexed totally through a no index or a robots.txt file, but they haven't because they want people coming up to their site. They want people to be induced to subscribe. So clearly News Corp likes this free advertising. Other media entities take different approaches. For example, The Guardian puts its whole story up, but every time you open a Guardian story, you get a little page saying, please support us. So they let you read the whole story, but they guilt trip you into becoming a subscriber. And trust me, guilt tripping does work, although I haven't become a subscriber yet. So the idea that the tech companies are using information without permission is a lie. You can stop them indexing your information. And the thing that concerns me more about this is the government is attempting to tax a service that the tech companies are providing for free. Right? Don't tax that. Tax the paid service. They do heaps of paid advertising. Remember, anything they do for free, providing you with Gmail, what have you, they're doing because they want to end up selling paid ads. Paid ads are the only things that matter. So, don't beat around a bush and tax these things that, they're accidentally providing a free service to Australian media companies, to the Australian government, to health agencies, because they're trying to get people to go on their platform and see paid ads. Tax the paid ads. Deal with what you want. Now, what does this basically mean? The Australian government seems to be trying to disincentivize a free benefit that the tech companies provide to Australian businesses. And if you look at the legislation, they're threatening the tech giants with a mediation process, whereby Google and Facebook negotiate with media companies to pay them for news. Well, what's that going to mean? It's going to mean only the big companies, News Corp, 9 Fairfax, they're going to be able to negotiate. They can go through all that legal process. Small ones will not. So what the current policy is trying to do is basically, intentionally or unintentionally, they're trying to benefit the large media companies. If you've got a small media company, you can't enter into this negotiation. And, Google has fallen for the hostage scenario and is paying the ransom. And Facebook said, we don't want any of this shit. We're just withdrawing all free advertising. Not clear to me why this is a surprise. I mean, surely our politicians can't be as stupid as the British ones, but they're certainly giving them a run for their money.